Was smoking all my dragons, divine, righteous, almighty, greats, overachieving, never slacking. I'm back again with another Thomas, and I'm probably gonna not pronounce this right, but Sowell. My apologies, but where current black culture really comes from. The last video he did was he dropped some serious stuff. If y'all want to go check that out, to the last one I reacted to. I'm trying to remember what was it titled. The last one I reacted to, it was like facts about slavery not told in school or something like that. If you guys want to check out the original link to this video, it will be in the description, as well as my Instagram, things like that, Patreon, Cashapp, Twitch, all that good stuff, right? So go ahead, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Let's hop right into this and see. Let's see what he brings forth for us to know.
These people are creating a terrible problem in our cities. They can't or won't hold a job, they flout the law constantly and neglect their children, they drink too much, and their moral standards would shame an alley cat. For some reason or other, they absolutely refuse to accommodate themselves to any kind of decent, civilized life.
Whew! Came in shooting.
This was said in 1956 in Indianapolis, not about blacks or other minorities, but about poor whites from the South. Nor was Indianapolis.
Wow, they caught me off guard because I'm thinking, oh, they talk about, so-called blacks in the ghetto today. I'm like, damn, here we go. And he completely just flipped the script. Like, I really thought that sounds just like a lot of people in the ghetto today. I'm not even going to lie to you. A lot of so-called black people. So let me rewind this because that just caught me off guard. I wasn't expecting that.
Or won't hold a job, they flout the law constantly and neglect their children. They drink too much, and their moral standards would shame an alley cat. For some reason or other, they absolutely refuse to accommodate themselves to any kind of decent, civilized life. This was said in 1956 in Indianapolis, not about blacks or other minorities, but about poor whites from the South. Nor was Indianapolis unique in this respect. A 1951 survey in Detroit found that white Southerners living there were considered undesirable by 21% of those surveyed, compared to 13% who ranked blacks the same way.
I never, ever, ever learned this in school. Ever.
Considered undesirable by 21% of those surveyed, compared to 13% who ranked blacks the same way. In the late 1940s, a Chicago employer said frankly, "I told the guard at the plant gate to tell the hillbillies that there were no openings." When poor whites from the South moved into northern cities to work in war plants during the Second World War, occasionally a white Southerner would find that a flat or a furnished room had just been rented when the landlord heard his Southern accent. More is involved here than a mere parallel between blacks and Southern whites. What is involved is a common subculture that goes back for centuries, which has encompassed everything from ways of talking to attitudes toward education, violence, and sex, and which originated not in the South, but in those parts of the British Isles from which white Southerners came. That culture long ago died out where it originated in Britain, while surviving in the American South.
I ain't gonna lie, when you look at like England and the Last Kingdom, and certain shows, and you look at the poor people there, they was definitely just pretty savage. I'm not even gonna lie. From what I see on these shows, they're pretty savage. They were living pretty savage.
Then it largely died out among both white and black Southerners, while still surviving today in the poorest and worst of the urban black ghettos. It is not uncommon for a culture to survive longer where it is transplanted and to retain characteristics lost in its place of origin. The French spoken in Quebec and the Spanish spoken in Mexico contain words and phrases that have long since become archaic in France and Spain. Regional German dialects persisted among Germans living in the United States after those dialects had begun to die out in Germany itself. A scholar specializing in the history of the South has likewise noted among white Southerners archaic word forms, while another scholar has pointed out the continued use in that region of terms that were familiar at the time of the first Queen Elizabeth. The card game whist is today played almost exclusively by blacks, especially low-income blacks, though in the 18th century it was played by the British upper classes and has since then evolved into bridge.
Wow. Wow.
The history of the evolution of this game is indicative of a much broader pattern of cultural evolution in much more weighty things. Southern whites not only spoke the English language in very different ways from whites in other regions. Their churches, their roads, their homes, their music, their education, their food, and their sex lives were all sharply different from those of other whites. The history of this redneck or cracker culture is more than a curiosity. It has contemporary significance because of its influence on the economic and social evolution of vast numbers of people, millions of blacks and whites, and its continuing influence on the lives and deaths of a residual population in America's black ghettos, which has still not completely escaped from that culture. From early in American history, foreign visitors and domestic travelers alike were struck by cultural contrasts between the white population of the South and that of the rest of the country in general, and of New England in particular. In the early 19th century, Alexis de Tocqueville contrasted white Southerners with white Northerners in his classic Democracy in America, and Frederick Law Olmsted did the same later in his books about his travels through the antebellum South, notably Cotton Kingdom. The cultural values and social patterns prevalent among Southern whites included an aversion to work, proneness to violence, neglect of education, sexual promiscuity, improvidence, drunkenness, lack of entrepreneurship, reckless searches for excitement, lively music and dance, and a style of religious oratory marked by strident rhetoric, unbridled emotions, and flamboyant imagery. This oratorical style carried over into the political oratory of the region in both the Jim Crow era and the Civil Rights era, and has continued on into our own times among black politicians, preachers, and activists. Touchy pride, vanity, and boastful self-dramatization were also part of this redneck culture among people from regions of Britain where the civilization was the least developed. They boast and lack self-restraint, Olmsted said, after observing their descendants in the American antebellum South. While Professor Grady McWhiney's cracker culture is perhaps the most thorough historical study of the values and behavioral patterns of white Southerners, many other scholarly studies have turned up very similar patterns, even when they differed in some ways as to the causes. Professor David Hackett Fisher's Albion Seed, for example,
dropping bombs in this video,
challenges the Celtic connection thesis put forth by Professor McWhiney, but shows many of the same cultural patterns among the same people, both in Britain and in the American South. Popular writings of the 19th and 20th centuries have likewise described similar behavior, including the Indianapolis residents' comments on white Southern migrants to that city, which sound so much like what many have said about ghetto blacks. None of this is meant to claim that these patterns have remained rigidly unchanged over the centuries, or that there are literally no differences between whites and blacks in any aspects of this subculture. However, what is remarkable is how pervasive and how close the similarities have been.
When you look at the industries, the music industry, and you look at so much that goes on, it's almost like there's billions of dollars spent to keep the so-called blacks, right? To keep us in that type of mind state, that type of low frequency. A lot of people benefit from that, a lot of people behind the scenes, and they just like they benefit from the so-called white and black race baiting, and every time someone kills each other, all these high crime rates, there's people who are invested in the industrial prison complex who benefit from that. There's people that, if you want to go into the black markets of organs, and so much, I ain't gonna go too deep into that, but just a lot of black markets, a lot of people who own these funeral homes and things like that. It's like You know, it's so much people behind the scenes that actually benefit from, so-called black folks, right? As I would be called, that would benefit from us to stay in that type of mind frame. When you go back to the past like that, and you realize that what the Irish been through, and if you go look at the movie Gangs of New York, and you see the Irish getting off the boats and they're getting rocks called at them or thrown at them or bricks, and they're being yelled at like, "Go back, the Irish, you Mick," and all this crazy stuff. When you look at the way they were treated in immigrants, period, they weren't even looked at as white. They weren't looked at as citizens, you know. And then it seems like as that illusion of white and black became more of a reality, then it's like people were able to hide under those banners, and but except us so-called blacks in the ghettos, we couldn't hide under that. You couldn't just be an Italian and go and act like you're something else. Look at the skin. You can't do it. So a lot of people have benefited off of this, and they continue to benefit off of this, which is why when you look at rap culture right now, it's so murderous. It's so toxic. It's disgusting. It's disgusting. And now it's like, it's just who controls rap? Who controls this culture? Who signs these artists? When you go to the top of the food chain, it's like who really is behind all this? Who the artists, the celebrities are used to control the people's mind and keep the people distracted. But the question is, who's controlling them? It's just it's I could go in deep and deep about it, and but it's definitely a game here being played, and things aren't gonna change until people wake up. If you're looking at this from the mindset of prejudiced mind, then you're gonna try to discredit what I'm saying instead of trying to understand what I'm saying. Due to your lack of experience and the experiences you've had in life. You have to try to be more understanding. You have to open your eyes. You have to go take a trip to these places and really look around for yourself and see like why because when you look at fresh out of slavery, so-called blacks, what were they calling us back then? Negroes, colored, whatever. That every couple hundred, about 30 years or whatever, every few decades they change up the name on us, right? We was colored, we was Negroes, whatever. But when you look at right after slavery, it's like you look at Black Wall Street, you look at 1920 when majority of farmers were black, right? When you look at, it's like what happened, what happened? All these these civilizations. You look at Central Park, which was called Seneca Village. That was destroyed and turned into Central Park. That was a majority of a black village, a black area with so many places. Up in Syracuse, they had an amazing booming black economy. All these places that were ultimately destroyed. You had places that were bombed. It's like, what's the bigger agenda here? Why? What's really going on? And then you obviously moving into the crack era and moving in further into today. And this is not to make an excuse, because at the end of the day, people always have a choice. You always have free will. But at the end of the day, the question is who's behind all this and what's the bigger agenda.